Student leaders, welcome back. We want to take it to the next level, and this time we will introduce you to what we call stakeholder management. Stakeholder management, its importance, at least to student leaders, is really understanding the environment within which you operate, the role players within that environment. And it is in understanding them, knowing who they are, that you are able to strategically engage with them. And that's what stakeholder management is really all about. It's about strategically and intentionally devising ways of engaging with the different stakeholders that you might identify as relevant to your structure, to your term of office, right? So it means we are talking about effective relationship building within your institutions. And why is it important to build relationships with a number of stakeholders? Because you're going to rely on them for your functioning. Your success depends on how they relate with you as the SRC. So it is important that you cultivate better relationships with these stakeholders. So what stakeholder management then does is that it becomes the lifeblood of your effective relationship building. So it cannot be overlooked. It cannot be underplayed. It is important that the SRC is very intentional, is very clear. In fact, to the extent that we would advise that you identify one or two portfolios within the SRC structure that is going to deal specifically with stakeholder management. Whether you say it is the chairperson of the organization or the deputy chairperson or the president, but somebody has got to be responsible for stakeholder management on behalf of the SRC. Now, establishing sound relationships with each of these stakeholders and understanding how their work contributes to your success should be viewed and treated strategically, right? So it means taking a strategic view to stakeholder management. But what is this stakeholder management? A number of books have attempted a definition of them, but put together, what they're trying to say is that stakeholder management is a process of identifying, number one, of prioritizing, number two, and engaging stakeholders throughout your term of office. So important is that you keep this in mind. It's the process of identifying, prioritizing, and engaging with stakeholders throughout your term of office. It means accurately identifying who they are, and you will see as you go along that identifying who they are, you to make it easy for you need to begin by looking at those that you would consider your internal stakeholders and those that you would consider your external stakeholders. If you take some student body, students of the institution, they will become your primary, but not just your primary, but your internal stakeholders. Those have got a direct impact on the work that you do. They've got a direct benefit on the work that you do. That's why I consider them the most important of all stakeholders. But important is that you are able to delineate between the internal and the external stakeholders of your SRC. But in the process of identifying them, you also have to be able to say, what do they offer you as the SRC? What role do they have in the success of the SRC? And in that way, what expectations do they have from you as the SRC? And when you have that expectations, then you can come up with a way of managing those expectations. So you've got structures of a university that include council, members of Senate. You've got Department of Higher Education and Training. You've got the labor representatives of that university. You've got support staff in that university. You've got surrounding communities in that university. But as I said, you've got students, the most important. So the idea is that you are able to list all of them, and upon listing all of them, then determine which ones are internal to you, which ones are external to you, right? So they all, whether or not they're internal or external, they all have attributes that will have an impact on the work that you do. And some of these attributes that we speak about is that look at the level of influence that they have on you. And this is how you can determine whether they are internal or external. Look at the influence that they have on you. That in the absence of these people, or if they are against the work of the SRC is going to fail. So that's important. Influence. 2 is connection. How connected are you as the SRC to this stakeholder? We know that student leaders are highly connected to students because they ask themselves, before you become student leaders, you're a student. So connection, the level of connection is very important. Number 3, as an attribute, look at the power that they wield. How much power do they have in decision making around the institution, in decision making about the welfare of the SRC and the welfare of the students? 4, and the last one as an attribute, irreplaceability. Can you replace them? Can you substitute them for any other stakeholder that you find could be amenable to the cause of the SRC? It is when you look at these attributes that you are able to determine whether a stakeholder is internal or external. To repeat, it is influence, connection, power, and irreplaceability. Now, we spoke about stakeholder management being a process, right? A process would mean there's a number of things that must happen within that system. It's a set of activities, a series of activities that must happen. What are those activities? Ladies and gentlemen, they begin with, number 1, stakeholder identification. Number 2, stakeholder analysis. Number 3, stakeholder planning. And lastly, stakeholder engagement. When you speak about stakeholder identification, it's really about listing them, identifying them, who they are, what level of power do they have over you as the SRC, who wants the SRC to fail, right? Are there structures that want the SRC to fail? Who wants the SRC to succeed? So that's when you begin to identify who your stakeholders are. Stakeholder analysis, we have what we call a power interest grid. Power interest grid is, now that you've listed all of your stakeholders, right? Now that you know these ones are internal and external, now you have to begin to plot them in the power interest grid. Power interest grid will talk to you about there will be some stakeholders who will have very high power. They will have very high interest in the work that you do, right? So that's one grid. Then you have other stakeholders who they have got very high power, but they could not be interested in the work that you do, right? At least not on an operational basis. Then you've got what we call low power and high interest stakeholders. They don't have any power, but they have a lot of interest in the work that you do. If you think about the unions of a university, the unions, they represent the staff members of the university, but they have an interest in the work of the SRC because it affects them in some way. But they have no power really on the functioning or the funding of an SRC. So they become an example of your low power, high interest stakeholder. Then you've got your low power, low interest. If you think about the media as an example, they have no power on the work that you do. Even their interest is only when there's an issue on campus that they come running to campus. But generally, they don't go out of their way to influence the work of the SRC. So that is really about that stakeholder analysis, understanding who has got more power and what is the level of their interest in the work that you do as the SRC. Then, of course, there's stakeholder planning. Stakeholder planning is really around, now that we understand them, we have to ask questions such as, what kinds of information do they want from us? How do we then give them this information? When do we give them this information? Meaning the frequency of engagement with them. And I think within that realm, we will also talk to us about the channels of engagement. How do we engage with them? Do we send them emails? Do we sit together in a meeting with them? Do we connect with them via social media? But it is really understanding that is your stakeholder planning, understanding all of those dynamics around the different types of stakeholders that you then have. The manner in which you're going to engage with your stakeholders, again, it will be determined by the kind of stakeholder that you deal with. Are they internal? Are they external? What is their level of power? What is their level of interest? But we do know that a number of approaches could be adopted by the SRC. There will be stakeholders, ladies and gentlemen, that all that you need to do is to inform them. You don't necessarily need to consult them. You inform them of the decisions taken by the SRC, and that's as far as it goes. But there will be stakeholders that you are going to have to consult, right? So informing them is not enough. You're going to have to sit down with them and, in fact, get their opinions, get their buy-in into some of the projects of the SRC. Then there will be those stakeholders who you're going to have to involve, literally from conception of an idea to inception of a project, and they have to be part of almost like partners to the SRC. But you are going to require those that you are going to call your collaborators, people that you collaborate with. Again, just like the people that you're going to involve, these ones you need to take them by the hand. They need to walk the journey with you throughout your term of office. But then there will be some other stakeholders that you're going to have to empower. The students, as an example, you're going to have to empower them. By empowering, is that what we are finding is that in the majority, a number of your average student at any university, not just a UNISA program, have very little understanding of the work of the SRC, right? And so it becomes difficult for them to determine the efficacy of an SRC. And for us to be able to help them make that determination of whether or not an SRC was productive or effective, they need to have a level of information. They need to be empowered to know what is that the SRC does, what can they expect from the SRC, and how do they hold the SRC accountable. And that can only happen if there was a level of empowerment. So in terms of engagement approach, we make mention of 5 approaches. Number 1, informing. Number 2, consulting. Number 3, involving. Number 4, collaborating. And the last one is empowering. There's different types of, we spoke about power interest grid earlier on. Now we are going to make an assessment of each of these stakeholders, right? We have what we call an assessment matrix, but this assessment matrix, what it does is that it helps us determine the different levels of stakeholders from level 1 until level 5. Now your level 1 stakeholder, so you've got a list of them, you want to give them levels. The level 1 stakeholder is what we call an unaware stakeholder. They have very little understanding of the work of the SRC. In fact, they're very unaware of the existence of the SRC and the implications of the work of the SRC on student life. So you call those people unaware stakeholders. Level 2 stakeholders are what you call resistant stakeholders. They tend to know about what you do as the SRC and the impact of the SRC on student life, but they're a bit opposed to the SRC. They're skeptical to the SRC, the manner in which the SRC approaches its work. So those are called your resistant stakeholders. They are level 2 stakeholders. Then, ladies and gentlemen, we have what we call level 3 stakeholders. We call them neutral stakeholders, very aware of the work of the SRC, but they do not have very strong feelings towards it. And these are people who, they don't oppose the SRC, nor do they support the SRC. They're literally neutral. So the SRC could exist they couldn't be bothered. Whether the SRC is disbanded, they couldn't be bothered. So they're very, very neutral to the work of the SRC, but they are aware of the work of the SRC. You've got your level 4. We call them supportive stakeholders. Now, supportive stakeholders, ladies and gentlemen, they know about the SRC and its work. But importantly, they have a very positive attitude towards the SRC. They support the SRC and are willing to get behind the work of the SRC. In the main, you want supporters from this level 4, at least up to level 5. Now, level 5, we call them your leading stakeholders. Leading stakeholders, very aware of the work of the SRC. They actively get involved in the work of the SRC. They champion the work of the SRC. They fund the work of the SRC. And they take steps to ensure that the SRC is successful. So a functional and a functioning SRC, what you want is to convert all these stakeholders into level 4 or level 5 stakeholders, because those are very supportive and they're very leading. It means they are willing to take hands with the SRC. We propose, ladies and gentlemen, what we call a stakeholder engagement framework. This is a framework to be observed by the SRC on how you are going to approach your stakeholder engagement or stakeholder management. right? So three things are going to be important, at least as prescribed by this framework. Number one, consensus building, right? Number two, team norms, and lastly, common ground. Now, consensus building is really, as the word suggests, as the phrase suggests, is that you're trying to get people to build consensus with all these stakeholders, right? You get to understand what their mandates are and create coherence between your mandate and their mandate. So you're trying to arrive at convergence between the different mandates and the different goals that you have with them, right? So that you achieve commonality of purpose. But consensus building is almost impossible if we cannot agree on a value system that is going to guide the manner in which we engage with one another, help us find shared interests, and to work toward mutually beneficial outcomes. So it's important that as you strive for consensus building, you understand the different mandates and you achieve coherence, you create coherence. But important is understanding that you can only use a value system to help you achieve that. Team norms as a second framework, as a second component of the framework, is that understanding that we might have different mandates, different goals, but if we were to set rules and principles of engagement, that would take us far, because what those rules and principles do is that they guide conduct, they guide behavior, they guide programs of action, they establish clear, agreed upon behaviors, and of course, what expectations do we have of one another. And lastly is the issue around common ground. Right? It involves active communication. We are constantly talking to one another. We show high levels of empathy towards one another. We show high levels of emotional intelligence to one another. We are willing to understand the different perspectives. We understand that our perspectives are different, but we're willing to work towards some common ground. Within as I draw to a close, within the idea of stakeholder engagement, ladies and gentlemen, I think it's important that we understand the role that communication plays in stakeholder engagement. In fact, the proposition is that it is only through communication that you can achieve better stakeholder management, right? And what you want with your communication is that, as much as possible, let it be a communication that is accessible. Let it be communication that is responsive to the needs of yourselves as the SRC and of course your stakeholders. Make sure that your communication is relevant. You know who you're speaking to, when you speak to, and what is it that you need to communicate with. Ensure that it is timely, right? You don't want to wait until it's too late for you to communicate with the students about changes in their timetables and the exam timetables. Timely is extremely important. And of course, make sure as much as possible that you adhere to the principle of actionability, that what you communicate with whoever the stakeholder, it is something that they can actually do something about, that there's an expectation about what you want them to do. But it is important, as I close, that all SRC members commit and pledge their commitment to making sure that the communication of the SRC reaches all key audiences in the service of the university's student body. I thank you.